This city breathes in shadowed stone and steel, where buried truths refuse to fully heal, beneath the tracks where whispered memories stay, and lake wind carries what time could not take away. These are not tales to prove what eyes might see, but echoes born of loss and history, of laughter stilled and footsteps left behind, of moments pressed in brick and iron spine. Chicago does not haunt, it softly calls, through streets and doors and half-remembered halls, inviting those who listen, slow and true, to hear what once was real and still feels new. Statement of clarity and historical discernment. The following collection is presented as a work of historical folklore and narrative exploration. These stories are rooted in real locations, documented eyewitness accounts, newspaper archives, and long-standing Chicago oral traditions. However, like all folklore and so-called creepypasta, certain details have been shaped, exaggerated, or passed down through generations without definitive proof. Some accounts may be factual, others symbolic, and some may exist in the space between memory, myth, and imagination. This series does not assert supernatural claims as truth, nor does it dismiss the lived experiences of those who reported them. Instead, it invites discernment, reflection, and curiosity about how history, fear, grief, and place intertwine. My strong personal opinions are included. Series Introduction. Whispers Between the Streets, Chicago's Shadows and Stories. Chicago is a city built on ambition, tragedy, faith, violence, resilience, and reinvention. Beneath its elevated tracks, historic cemeteries, abandoned hospitals, lakefront fog, and alleyways lies a parallel history told not in textbooks but in hushed voices. Whispers Between the Streets is a collection of historically grounded Chicago folklore stories that may or may not be true. Each entry explores a well-known Chicago legend or lesser-known local account, separating verified historical facts from the folklore that grew around them. These are not simply ghost stories. They are cultural echoes. They reveal what a city fears, mourns, remembers, and refuses to forget. Whispers Between the Streets, a continuous reading. My born city of Chicago breathes in layers of memory, brick, and water, in streets worn smooth by footsteps long gone. It is a city that does not forget. It is a city that whispers if you listen. Between streetlights, under elevated tracks, beside rivers and lakes, the past lingers, pressed into the ground like a story waiting for witnesses. On Archer Avenue, drivers tell of a young woman in a white dress, polite, cold, and quiet, asking for a ride late at night, only to vanish at Resurrection Cemetery. For nearly a century, this encounter has been repeated, documented in newspaper archives and driver recollections, yet no grave confirms her existence. It is not a ghost that persists. It is memory, anchored to a place, insistent on being remembered. In the abandoned Bachelor's Grove Cemetery, where families once buried their dead in the 1800s, stories of a woman sitting on a gravestone, of monks drifting among trees, and of lights without source emerged only after neglect set in. The unease comes not from spirits but from forgetting. When respect is absent, silence becomes heavy, and imagination fills the void. At Hull House, in 1913, panic spread over the so-called devil baby. A child born with horns and hooves, said to embody evil. Newspapers printed the story, women traveled to see it, and fear gripped the city. No baby existed. What persisted was anxiety, superstition, and the projection of collective fear onto the vulnerable. The lesson endures. Sometimes the monster is never real, only fear itself. The Iroquois theater fire of 1903 claimed over 600 lives, mostly women and children, when locked exits and hidden doors trapped them inside. Performers and staff later spoke of sobbing in empty balconies and drafts where no doors stood open. There are no spirits, only grief concentrated so heavily it lingers decades later. Disaster leaves traces where joy once existed. H. Holmes and his so-called murder castle remind us that some of the darkest stories need no legend. The man was real, the building was real, and deception was intentional. Hallways led nowhere, rooms disoriented. Evil need not be supernatural to unsettle, it can hide in ambition and charm. Cabrini Green tells a different story. Shadows in stairwells, presences in empty corridors, whispers in the dark, they are not ghosts. They are the product of neglect, poverty, and trauma. When communities are abandoned, fear takes root, and stories carry lessons about human endurance and oversight. On the Chicago River, the Eastland disaster of 1915 overturned over 800 lives. People later reported hearing splashing and laughter where tragedy had occurred. These are not spirits, they are grief resurfacing, memory pressing against the present. Water retains history, and the river remembers what humans would prefer to forget. The Levee District, alive with vice in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, housed women and men who often vanished without trace. Records confirm some disappearances, though follow-up was rare. The district's stories are not about haunting, they are about erasure, and the lingering unease of forgotten lives. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre of 1929 left 7 men dead in a garage on North Clark Street. Later witnesses reported silence in the area, tension palpable on winter nights. Violence imprints itself. It does not need ghosts to be remembered. Cook County Hospital, built in the early 20th century, treated thousands, many of whom never left. Staff report footsteps, rolling gurneys, and flickering lights in empty corridors. These are echoes of grief, not spirits. Buildings hold memory, and hospitals hold the concentrated weight of endings. Lincoln Park was once a cemetery. Mid-19th century bodies were moved, but not all remains were relocated. Visitors report unease near the lake, discomfort tied not to haunting, but to forgotten history and displacement, a city walking over lives it neglected to honor. The Union stockyards processed millions of animals and employed thousands of workers, with brutal labor conditions and frequent death. After closure, guards reported strange sounds in the empty yards. Not ghosts, but residue, the psychological weight of decades of toil and suffering. The LaSalle Hotel, opened in 1909, witnessed a fire in 1949 that trapped over 60 people in stairwells. Later guests and staff reported sudden chills and hesitation near certain staircases. Panic leaves traces in the architecture. Memory is imprinted where escape failed. Old Joliet Prison, during prisoner transfers, recorded escapes and deaths. Drivers later spoke of stretches of road that felt wrong. Roads absorb tension, and confinement extends beyond walls, leaving an imprint not of spirits but of restraint. The Our Lady of the Angels fire of 1958 killed 92 children and 3 nuns. Teachers reported hearing bells after hours, footsteps in empty halls. Buildings absorb concentrated grief. Tragedy leaves memory where life once rang out. Chicago's Pedway, The underground network connecting buildings unsettles late-night workers with disorientation and footsteps that do not align with anyone present. This is not legend, but environmental perception, instinct, and awareness heightened in spaces removed from landmarks. In 1900, Chicago reversed the river's flow. Boaters reported unease along certain stretches afterward. Massive human intervention leaves subtle psychological effects, a reminder that when we reshape nature, memory persists. The Great Chicago Fire of 1871 consumed thousands of buildings, leaving over 100,000 people homeless. Years later, people reported smells of smoke or sudden heat in alleys. Disaster imprints itself into the city, and memory lingers quietly in the fabric of streets and corners. Hull House's basements, used for workshops and storage, echoed with footsteps when empty. Buildings carry repetition and layered activity. What is perceived as eerie is memory pressing outward, not spirits moving inward. Haymarket Square, in 1886, witnessed bombing and deaths during a labor rally. Visitors later reported tense stillness near the monument. The shadow there is social memory, labor, injustice, and cost, refusing to fade. Pullman strike violence of 1894 left streets heavy with death and despair. Residents spoke of oppressive silence in the yards at night. Factories retain residue of conflict, echoing hardship long after the gates close. The 1893 World's Fair dazzled millions, but not all foundations and artifacts were removed. Visitors reported minor disturbances where nothing remained. Memory of human activity is pressed into land. St. Mary's Church crypts held burials and historical records. Caretakers noted cold spots and footsteps. Crypts contain concentrated history. What is sensed is the weight of memory, not haunting. Museum campus, built on reclaimed land along the lake, unsettles late-night workers. Flickering lights, sudden breezes, and feelings of being watched are perceptual echoes of human movement pressed into the environment. Navy Pier, constructed in 1916, challenged laborers and visitors with accidents and near misses. Unexplained sensations later reported are not ghosts, but imprints of human effort, diligence, and attention over time. And now, the stories conclude. 25 accounts, each a reflection of memory pressed into place, loss carried forward, and history that refuses to fade. Chicago is not haunted in the conventional sense. It is remembered, attentive, and insistent. Streets, buildings, rivers, and parks whisper if we listen carefully. They ask not for fear, but for awareness, reflection, and care. The city teaches through echoes, through shadows of labor and grief, through alleyways and riverbeds, stairwells and basements, cemeteries and crypts. It asks that we walk forward with eyes open, that we honor the past without being trapped by it, and that we recognize the persistence of what was lived, lost, and remembered. In my opinion, my born city of Chicago does not haunt, it recalls. And if you listen long enough, your city may recall you. Reflection. Now as these streets grow quiet in your mind, and every borrowed echo falls behind, remember this was never meant to prove. What lingers most is what we choose to move. The past still breathes where present feet have been. In doorways dark and spaces in between, these stories rest where fact and feeling meet. Not meant to chase you home along the street, Chicago does not cling, it lets things be, it waits in brick and water patiently, and when you turn away from what you read, it asks not fear, But care in how you proceed.